بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. It is a great honor and a great privilege to spend this evening with a brother that I've yearned to get closer to. MashaAllah. We have Shaykh Yusuf Rios in the building today, and we're still doing the didactic poem of Imam Maulud, Untitled Chapter, Purification of the Heart. This week, we're going to be discussing iniquity, right, which is sometimes mentioned as a synonym for evil, but Imam Maulud defines it in particular as to harm another creature without right. But before we get into that, Shaykh Yusuf, how are you, Habib? Alhamdulillah. Good to have you, man. How's the family? Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. You know, I remember, how long have you, if you don't mind my asking, when did you embrace Islam?
It's been over 20 years now.
Yeah. Allahu Akbar.
It's been over 20 years.
Yeah, for me as well, man. It's been over 20 years. You know,
I stopped counting after a bit.
For me as well, it's been over 20 years. I like to joke with people that, you know, I accepted Islam when I was 4. You know what I'm saying? Because it's been over 20 years. But I remember, you know, after initially embracing Islam, it was all about the zahir. It was all about fiqh. You know, we were people, and this isn't, you know, necessarily blameworthy, but we were a community of ta'zeem al-sharia. You know, there was a lot of esteem and honor and respect given to the outward dictates of the sharia. We really didn't hear a lot about the heart, purifying the heart, you know, tazkiyah, purifying the soul, cleansing the soul of, you know, blameworthy qualities and then trying to assume prophetic ones. You know, we really didn't talk a lot about that. Maybe your experience was different.
Is it interesting? I mean, is it because you're forcing me my mind to think back into memories, and what immediately comes to mind in those initial phases, because Luqman Williams, we were together in that time period. So that was like the MSA time, but I was in Cleveland during that time, and I was like very embedded in the African American community, and the Arab community. They had their own masjid, but they had their own thing going on. And then you had the MSA, which was students from mostly the immigrant community. So we had study groups during that time. So people were serious. The community was serious. Like that generation. It's not to take away from this community because this time period, but it has its own qualities. But there was much more discipline in terms of learning. And during that time period, that's the context. During that time period, Reliance of the Traveler had become that book that was translated. And what was floating around was Aisha Bewley's, her translation, and Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. May Allah make it easy for him and for us. And so he had pushed a lot the idea of fiqh. So people were talking about fiqh on a regular basis. But like, for instance, I had an encounter with Jamaat Tabligh, but within the context of the African American community. You know, the Masjid Noor was actually, I ended up becoming an imam there. But that was one of the oldest.
This is in Cleveland or in Chicago? In Cleveland. Because we have a Masjid Noor in Chicago.
Yeah.
That's also frequented by Jamaat Tabligh.
MashaAllah. So that community they had that orientation, but it was much more disciplined in terms of how they function. Now, that was the background of what was popular, but what came before, you know, Cleveland goes back to the 1900s.
Hajj Wali Akram.
Yeah, Hajj Wali Akram. Remember that a lot of the groups, you know this, but a lot of the groups, they had encounters with Tasawwuf. They encountered with the Sufi groups but it wasn't always a good encounter.
Right.
Even
Right.
even the whole concept of the Fuqar Jamaat, the Fuqar Jamaat, which was it was, you know, the idea of the cultural imperative. They were creating their own songs and nasheeds, and they were very good at it. Actually,
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the generation now doesn't even know that that existed. But that type of Sufism took them in another direction. You know what I'm saying? It took them in another, and you know, the politics that had surrounded that reality. But I think that part of the emphasis on the fiqh was authenticity.
Right.
But it was never really combined. You know, the rhetoric was never really combined.
Right. Combining the inward and the outward.
I think honestly, to be fair, I think that the brothers from Tablighi Jamaat, in specific, the African American community, I'm talking about the indigenous community here. I think they had that understanding. They had the value of dhikr. They had the value of, you know, the fiqh, the halal and haram knowledge. They had the discipline that came along with that. You know, I'll say that the Salafi Dawah tried to do a lot for promoting the hadith, and that was part of, you know, that discussion takes place. You know, Maulana Zakaria Kandahlawi, he has that discussion in his book Sharia wa Tariqa. If I follow the Sharia, will I get to the Haqiqah, or do I have to follow a Tariqa, you know, to get there?
Right.
And he has that discussion with his Shaykh, and his Shaykh said, well, if you follow the Sharia and you got there,
you get there.
You got there. You know what I'm saying? You don't necessarily have to go that path. But I think that that's the historical backdrop to say that, you know, there were some discussions that were there, but I think that yes, our community developed into a very externalist, emotionalist, and I would even say a spiritually bankrupt community. And I'm telling you from a personal level, because I came out of Catholicism, you know, and I was heavy into meditation and all of that type of stuff. There was, I've always found that there was not a lot of development on that front.
Right. Actually, man, I feel like that was also due to, I think, you know, a lack of, you know, influence from sisters. You know, I feel like the outward, the madahir of Sunnah, right? These outward expressions of Sunnah, these outward expressions of Sharia, I think these are things that naturally appeal to brothers. You know, somebody said that even if you look at like child developmental theory, a lot of the games that boys play have rules and clear winners and losers. But a lot of the games that girls play don't have rules and they don't have clear winners and losers. That, you know, it's not that women are anti-Sharia. I'm not even making that suggestion, nor am I saying men are anti-spirituality. But I do think that a lot of the pedagogy, a lot of the teaching, a lot of the emphasis in our community was something that was being done by brothers for brothers. So authenticity was big. Outward expressions of your Islam were big. The concept of Sunnah, not as a mirror in front of which I can reform my character, dealing with my issues with perhaps my temper, or you know, becoming more patient, becoming more gentle, becoming more service oriented, but rather Sunnah as, you know, kneeling down before I take a drink of water, or, you know, making sure that I, you know, put my right shoe on first and I take my left shoe off first.
The perfunctory.
Right, kind of the perfunctory. I think that's something that naturally, in my experience, it appeals to brothers. But that deeper understanding of, like the Prophet alayhi wasalam said, وَمَا بُعِثْتُ إِلَّا أَنْ أُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was only sent to perfect noble traits of character. Alayhi salatu wasalam. Right? There's this idea that, you know, all of those outward manifestations are supposed to be leading us somewhere, right? We're lessening, or we're decreasing the reliance on the self, right? And increasing the reliance on God, and increasing, you know, hopefully our love for the Prophet ﷺ through adherence to his way.
I think it was there. I mean, like I know, like Masjid Haq in Cleveland specifically, I think there's a number of different dynamics how we can look at this, historically speaking, and then how we can change our methodology in today's time. Because I see today, even within the context of the Salafi Da'wah, like if you look at Daughter Sunnah coming out of the UK, they have translated Ibn Qudama's books, which basically there is only one book, which is the Minhaj al-Qasidin. They have translated a lot of books on Raqa'iq and Tazkiyah and all of that stuff. And I think that the climate has changed. But I think within the context of the African American community that was there, because some of the imams, they had connections with those types of mashaykh. You know what I mean?
I do.
It was there, but I think that I don't know if that would have reached the street.
Yeah, no, I mean,
you know what I'm saying? And I think that I like to be fluid like water, and people they like to pin me. They like, where you from, what you about, what, where you on, that type of stuff. But I think that the Salafi Dawah reached an environment that was coarse and hostile.
Yeah.
And it allowed brothers to be able to practice religion in a hostile environment. And it allowed another group of people to have some sort of guidelines and evidence. Right. But I think that what you brought up is something that is the crisis of the Ummah. If you talk about the feminine, we get a little philosophical. If you talk about the feminine dimension, I think that spirituality, is suffering just as well as the position of women in the Muslim community. So,
there you go. They're always directly related.
Yeah, we're into the externality speaks a lot to the materialism of the age, or the dominance of the intellect over the heart, and that's where we're at. Even now, look at this phase in Ilm al-Kalam. This phase in Ilm al-Kalam that we're going through in the community is not different than what we went through with the Salafis. You understand what I'm saying? And the overemphasis on Aqidah and who's correct and who's not correct, but the issue of compassion and the issue of forgiveness and the issue of connecting with people, and the issue of being easy going with the people in their stages of development, because we all go through these stages of development. That's missing, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with we have not reached the civilizational level. Is all what we're doing is piecemeal. You know what I'm saying? As a community, so everybody's contributing here and there, and is a violent contribution.
Yeah, but we're not. It's almost like we've failed to see the big picture.
Yes.
We don't see the big picture.
Yes.
Dr. Jackson used to always say that, positive civilizations, there's whatever the core values of those people are, that's at the center. And it's generating so much force, it can pull everything into the service of what's at the center. Or you can have that force spinning the other way, and it's pushing everything out. Right? And we're pushing everything out, right? But I want to get into this a little bit, inshallah. Today we're discussing iniquity, which is a word that when you use it in English, you almost always use it alongside sin. Sin and iniquity. What do you think about when you hear the term iniquity?
Iniquity is a violation, a violation of one's relationship with the law, and also I think about the oppression on the earth between people. You know what I'm saying?
Because whenever a person is talking about like the religious dimension of oppression, we say iniquity. And I think it's important, that I think we have to be very focused on crafting language.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because one American social commentator said, there are certain words that you don't use when describing the American social reality. One of them is sin.
Right.
You can say somebody made a mistake. You can say it was an indiscretion. You can say it lacked, it was, a kerfuffle. You know what I'm saying? But you don't say sin.
Yeah.
Because when you say sin, it's not that what was done was merely not expedient or inappropriate. No, there's a metaphysical dimension to sin. It was evil. So oppression, if looked at as like a social reality, one person harmed another person. And the word dhulm is I mean, that's a heavy term, right? Of the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-dhulmu dhulumatu yawm al-qiyamah." That dhulm, oppression, will be darkness on yawm al-qiyamah. But when you use a word like iniquity, it talks about kind of like the spiritual dimension of oppressing somebody. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know if you feel that at all.
The image that comes to mind is what goes on in urban environments. That was when you said it. That was when I had some ideas, but the image that came was the city life.
Yeah.
And its breakdown.
Absolutely. It's iniquitous. It pits people against each other in a way that promotes them harming each other.
Yes.
And for Muslims, we have to stand out against that. The Prophet ﷺ, in terms of the fundamental definition of who he was, what he was, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have only sent you as a mercy to everything in existence. What can we do to distance ourselves from iniquity and try to emulate that prophetic mercy?
My thing is that we have to. I have some radical thoughts on that thing.
This is your space. It's open.
I personally, there's a few things here. One is we have to address our own trauma. Mm-hmm. We have to address our own trauma so that we have the capacity to love each other. And this is the issue that we have, and we have to do some work to break from the matrix of individualism, because what we're doing is we're just supporting our own madness and our own ego and our own internal spiritual destruction and the community's destruction as well. Mm-hmm. But when I think of the ayat of the Quran, some of the mufassirun or the mufassirin, I use the ayat a lot, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent as a mercy. I even try to say compassion as well. That's the love of Allah. We don't talk about love as this. Yeah, see, I came from a Christian background.
Yeah, so you're very comfortable with that language.
The language is not. Yeah, we don't talk about love.
I remember once, man, a brother was giving a khutbah, and he mentioned the love of God a number of times during the khutbah. And afterward, brother said, "Man, it sounded like it was like a church sermon or something like that." And I said, "What? Why? Why did you find it like a church sermon?" Because he was talking about the love of God. And I was thinking, subhanAllah.
But this is the distortion.
If we don't relate to God with love, then what do we relate to him with? La ilaha illallah. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ يَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. Say, if you love God, then follow me. God will love you and he will forgive you of your sins.
Yeah, and even the issue of al-ittiba or the following of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, we don't have clear who the Prophet is. We're between, and this is a respectful point, but we're between two extremes. We're between the concept of the border concept and the concept of what's the hadith sahih. But like what you were saying about the vision, see, I mean, we have to learn certain things. The Christians will say, what would Jesus do? Are we clear what Muhammad will do, alayhi salatu wasalam? Or even Jesus, are we clear what the prophets will do and their interaction with people? You know what I'm saying? Some of us, it doesn't come intuitively. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll give you an example.
Bismillah, please.
There was this, recently, at the beginning of COVID, we did a collection, 3 Puerto Rican imams in Jersey. So one organization was contacted and immediately they said, but who is this for? That it was a collection of resources to buy food during COVID in a pandemic, or should I say like natural human disaster that we can disappear, we almost extinct, we're dying out here. And so the person says, well, we only deal with Muslims. And the reality of that statement is like, do we only even really deal with Muslims?
Right. What does that mean?
So the human side, the instinctual side of automatically second nature, the outpouring love for humanity that the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated. If we really look at Sira, we can see those moments in which that was demonstrated, that compassion, that love, that care, that concern, that taking out debt for people to ease their thing, their hardship, whatever it is that they're going through. For whatever reason, that type of understanding of who the prophet is not with us. We're caught up in the intellectual side and the knowledge side, and whether the hadith is sahih. That's all. Is it sahih? Is it not sahih? Or this or that? Or we're caught up in the spiritual elevation of salawat, but then the outpouring of that to people. Okay, let me stand on that sound hadith. You know what I'm saying? Which elevates the dignity of human being. Like, where's the action to that, or that emotion that may be there, and that sending of the salawat? Where's that at in our relationships to each other, right? And so we see that a lot of times when it comes to divorce, when it comes to brothers and sisters fighting each other over concepts or whatever, is immediately we go for the jugular vein, right? So, in many senses, is a judgment on my part, but a lot of our online culture is iniquitous.
It's an iniquitous culture.
And that's why we're getting sick. You understand? It's a culture where there's takfir, where there's belittling, where there is, a misjudgment, those types of things.
He mentions in the next line that the root cause of iniquity is hibriyasa, is the love of leadership. Because to oppress somebody, you have to arrogate yourself over them. Right. So he's suggesting that the reason why people treat each other that way is that the oppressor, the zalim, the iniquitous one, he or she wants to feel some power over the person they're subjecting to their power. Right. And that one has to relinquish love of leadership, love of being over people, right? So that one can experience true humility, man.
That's considered in our community and in the society, it's considered weakness.
Absolutely. It's when I think about what leading means, especially like viewed through the lens of the Prophet ﷺ, the only thing leadership entails is a willingness to sacrifice. And if you're not willing to sacrifice, then what does it mean for you to be the leader? Right? What does that mean? So it's like I'm having an argument with my wife, and I'm actually invoking the fact that I'm the Amir. But then I'm saying you have to be inconvenienced because I'm the Amir. No, that's backwards. Right? That's inqilab al-haqa'iq. Actually, you should be made comfortable, and I should be inconvenienced because I'm the Amir. That's what it means. I was asking one of my teachers, I said, bil istiqra, with looking at the entire corpus of hadith, what is the defining characteristic of the Prophet alayhi sallam? I'm trying to ask good questions. And he said, it's the ability to elevate the other.
Subhanallah.
It's the ability to think about others more than you think about yourself.
Yeah, Isar was what immediately came to my mind when you were talking about the husband-wife example. And that is, unfortunately, that's, where, again, I think that we don't, in the 60s, there was a lot of anti-capitalist writing or critical assessments of capitalism. And Herbert Marcuse, he wrote a book, One Dimensional Man. He wrote One Dimensional Man, and in that book, it was an excellent breakdown of the tarbiyah of the system, the way that the system trains our instincts. And we know that from commercials, we know that children can recognize these materialist, commercial symbols. They know what it means. It's a symbol. They know everything that surrounds them. They see this, it means Walmart. They see that, it means Taco Bell. They see this, it means that.
Yeah,
see,
all
that
these
means Nike.
Logos and insignias and all that stuff.
And so we've been given a tarbiyah, and that tarbiyah is really one that is rooted on our instincts or the following of our desires. Obey your thirst. You know what I'm saying? And so when it comes to the issue of ithar or preferring others, that's going to take another type of tarbiyah. right? It's going to take another type of training in which in serving each other. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of the things, you know, like I remember Sheikh Ahmed Tahiriyan, Rahmatullahi alayhi, in the halaqah, you know, he would, not all the teachers allow their students to drink in their halaqah. So he allowed them to drink. He not only allowed them, he purchased them tea, and it benefited the poor, you know, the tea maker and his family, because now there's barakah coming in. You know, 100 things of tea are being sold. You know, and so then one time he said, he told the brothers, because nobody would get up, they thought that this tea guy will come in and has to serve 100 things of tea by himself. So he told them, get up and serve your brothers. And so that's something that we, you know, that's something that we don't like to do. We don't like to serve each other.
Absolutely.
Right. And so if you take that on a philosophical level, that was one of the biggest problems in the Holocaust. I can't recognize your humanity. I can easily X you out. I can cancel you out. Easy. Right. And so how then, where's the moral imperative? It's easy for me to be iniquitous towards you if I dehumanize you.
Absolutely.
Right.
I always say that, you know, dehumanization must proceed, or in fact, it must, you know, come before extermination or abuse.
Yes.
You know, somebody that you recognize as a full-fledged human being automatically has certain rights over you. Automatic, as long as you recognize their humanity. You know, you know, even though human rights are correctly identified as a dogma, it's something that we feel. It's something that we sense, that there is something inherently noble about the human creature, that he or she should not be dehumanized, right? لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. God says, truly we have given dignity to all of the children of Adam. And if you want to treat somebody in a way that removes that dignity, you have to dehumanize them first.
And in order to do that, you have to have the riyasa.
And you have to love it.
Yeah.
You know, my daughter was talking to me a couple of weeks ago about blackface, right? She saw some old clips of vaudeville or something like that. And he's got the soot and blacked up and the big comical red lips. And she said, it's enough for white Americans to enslave Black Americans. And it's enough for them to create all kinds of laws and policies that frustrate Black American attempts at upward mobility. She didn't say it that sophisticated, but you know, man, I'm putting it in my own. She said something like that, but she is very bright, mashallah. She said, but why would they dress up and pretend to be Black people to humiliate? It was such a vile, ugly expression of humor to my young daughter. And she just wants, she wanted to ask her dad about it. Why would somebody do this? And I said, not thinking about the lesson that we were going to be covering today or the conversation we'd be having, but you have to dehumanize someone, right? You have to take every ounce of humanity they have from them in order to justify that kind of mistreatment of them.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the riyasa.
Yeah.
Right. It comes back to this feeling of being above, being more, being greater.
Yeah.
And you know, in the next line, Imam Maulud says, but why would you try to arrogate yourself over the servants of God? Like, you're doing all of this. Don't you recognize that they will die and you will die? Right.
That in itself had, the first thing that comes to mind is Dostoevsky. Sorry to cut you off. How he says,
Bismillah,
you know, without God, all things are possible.
Absolutely.
You know, if there's no consequence, you know, if there's no concept of an account, you know what I'm saying? And
Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
Brothers Karamazov.
It's just a free for all. And I think, let me ask you this. If we're being iniquitous, what does that say about our iman? In those dimensions, the dimensions that, how can you take a position over the servants of Allah? for their destruction, knowing that basically there's an account, basically there's a violation. Like what does that say about our Imam?
You know, I think what the Imam is driving here, it says that something about your tawheed is deficient. Meaning there's something you want from the people you're attempting to dominate. There's something you want, like it is going to personally give you something to feel yourself over them. But it should give you something to feel yourself under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like your focus is all wrong, man. It's like you want to feel yourself over these people, right? You've dominated them. You've conquered them. You've subdued them. What does that give you? Right? Your focus, it's almost like you're looking at the terrestrial, you should be looking at the celestial. You're looking down, you should be looking up, right? So I think that it indicates that the individual that engages in that kind of iniquity, his or her focus is wrong. Why are you look? It's almost like, going back to the example we gave, the mistreatment, the abuse, the attempted genocide on Black Americans, in this country, for whatever that gave the people who perpetrated, those acts of genocide against them. Did they ever stop to think about the fact that God was over them? Did they pause? Did you, it's almost like, you were given a position of empowerment over someone else. And I mean, in the dunya, هو الذي رفع بعضكم فوق بعض درجات ليبلوكم فيما آتاكم. This ayah is very important to this conversation. It is He who raised some of you above others in rank to test you in what He has given you. That the only reason كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول على رعيته, all of you are shepherds and all of you will be questioned about how you guided your flocks. So the idea that, yes, we don't believe in a dunya without hierarchy. Yes, there's rutab, yani, there's ranks. But the purpose of hierarchy is not domination. It's not self-service and other obliteration. You're being tested. You're being tested with regard to your family. You're being tested with regard to your children. If you're a governor, you're being tested with regard to the citizenry over which you govern or over which you preside. If you're an employer, you're being tested with regard to how you treat your employees, right? Even in a classical Islamic legal formulation, the non-Muslims living among Muslims were called dhimmis, which now in this perverted way, dhimmatude has been interpreted to mean second-class citizenship, right? But this is before the nation state. Dhimma means responsibility. When you make your prayer, it's what? Bari'atu dhimma. You've cleared your responsibility. So the fact that non-Muslims will refer to as dhimmis is you are responsible for how you treat these people. If you treat them well, you're adhering to the way of the Prophet ﷺ. If you mistreat them, you're disobeying the Prophet ﷺ. And in the authentic hadith, he says what? I and the person who mistreats a dhimmi will be at odds on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Right? There's going to be ranks. But what does that mean? This is what our tradition is about. So something, if a person engages in that iniquity, something about the responsibility of leadership is lost on them.
Well, it's funny that you brought that point up, the whole issue of pretty much being absent-minded of God. Nietzsche and the concept of the Superman. And if you think about the philosophy of Nietzsche, which is pretty much what dominates in today's time. The individual that's the superior to anyone, and you make your own meaning in the world. You understand what I'm saying? That can only exist if there is no God, if you become God in reality. You know, and for him, the idea of God was dead.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at the society and the time period that we live in reality, because I like what you brought up in the point of your reflection, that there's something wrong with Tawheed. I think that we don't tie Tawheed enough to this reality of it's part of how we treat each other.
There's no doubt about it.
Right. And if you're going to take that level where you think you're a Superman above people and you make your own values, like Allah makes law of how we should treat each other, how we should deal with each other, then that's no different than the Pharaoh complex. We put it in another time period. That's for another group of people. But what Nietzsche is doing there, and white supremacy, and what we see now, and it's the same as the Pharaoh complex.
No doubt about it.
You know, and so I think that Iman overall, when we look at the 77, you know, the hadith of the 77 branches of Iman, there's no doubt that, you know, Tawheed is tied into character, is tied into how we treat each other. And I want to put that emphasis because too many Muslims, we believe we can treat each other like garbage.
It's crazy.
And it's okay. You know what I'm saying? And especially in the online world, which has become our community because of COVID and everything like that. We believe, because we are faceless to each other, we deal with each other in that facelessness. That moral imperative is not there, you know, to treat each other in the right way. And I have to really make sure that people listen to that. I feel responsible because in today's time, people receiving that treatment sometimes become suicidal, or sometimes we got a report a couple months back, a sister left the deen, and she said specifically, she wrote a whole letter out. She left the deen because of the way she was being treated. You know, and so what?
Saddun an sabilillah.
So the issue,
blocking the path of Allah.
I don't want to over talk.
No, Bismillah. No.
You know, I think that you know, you brought a lot of points here. I think that the issue of inequity is tied into our social conduct, is tied into the issue of justice, government, you know, leadership, and most of all, Iman, Tawheed.
Bismillah. You know, I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Ittaqillah haythuma kuntum. Fear Allah wherever you are. وَأَتْبِعِ السَّيِّئَةَ الْحَسَنَةَ تَمْحُوهَا وَخَالِقِ النَّاسَ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ. Fear God wherever you are. And if you make a mistake, follow that with good action. And treat people well. A lot of the sharh, the explanations of this hadith say that both of those are related to taqwa. Right? If you fear Allah, you will make tawbah when you make a mistake. And if you fear Allah, you'll treat people well. And we have to remember that the lines that connect us with Allah are not just vertical lines, but also horizontal lines.
Can you elaborate on that point a little more?
Which point?
The point of the haqq Allah wa haqq al-ibad. You know,
is that God has rights and the servants of God have rights. And anyone who, and what's interesting in our Sharia is that the rights of God, while of course having a higher priority than the rights of servants, have more flexibility in them. Right? You make a mistake, you repent, you make tawbah, bismillah, you've repaired the relationship with Allah. But if you wrong somebody, you actually have to go to that person and seek their forgiveness. There has to be reparations, truth and reconciliation. That must be there, right? You know, we are a community who regards our treatment of each other as part of our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can you say you worship God, but you can treat the servants of God in a coarse or harsh or callous, you know, manner, right? That doesn't, no. You know, أحسنكم خلقا. The Prophet قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام, the best of you are the best of you in character, right? And I think that this is something that is sorely lacking in our religious teaching, man. You know, you have people that, you know, it's like, we learn about the huquq of Allah, the rights of God.
Right.
So that, mashallah, we're praying.
Right.
We're fasting.
Right.
We're reading scripture.
Right.
We're trying to stay away from the muharramat.
Right.
Stay away from those things that are impermissible. You know, but when it comes to how we treat people, we just don't make the connection. There's a disconnect. There's some dissonance there, man.
Shaykh,
and that's how we fall into iniquity.
Let me ask you a question. This was something that I was thinking about when Amir he sent out the invitation. What happens when part of our culture and our habit or our way of being, even if we came into Islam, but we've been corrupted. What happens when that is our way? Inequity is our way. You know what I'm saying?
We need a collective tawbah. You know, I think, you know, we often talk about like an individual tawbah fardiyah. We need like tawbah jama'iyah. We need like a collective tawbah that, you know, because there are things that I do, man, that are so common to me because I grew up doing them. So many people around me do them that it wouldn't even occur to me that this was something that I need to change. It wouldn't even occur to me because I'm so accustomed to it. And it's not until you spend time with people who don't have those problems, people that aren't afflicted with the same struggles, same shortcomings, that you begin to glimpse another way, man. Right?
So what are you implying there, that we have to have sohbah with
people better than us, man? You know, with people, but that also understand us, but better than us. People that, you know, show us that, man, look, you don't have to walk around ready to fight or argue, or even if you do get into a disagreement, it's okay to relent. You know, like we grew up in a culture, man, where you never relent. You fight to the death. You never afford the person you're arguing with any space. You break them down. You break the points down that they're making. You decimate them. You crush them. You demoralize them.
Right.
You know, where it's like, no, man, that's no way to approach a brother. That's no way to approach a sister. So I think some of these things, we have to repent from them collectively, you know, and then while repenting collectively, we can hold each other accountable, because some of this stuff is like, as you were mentioning, it's not just my individual way. This is a way in which we've been reared, man.
That reminds me of what the Muslims were facing early on in the period of Jahiliyyah. The rule of the day was the rule of the day.
Yeah.
You know, it is, I think that the term Jahiliyyah has acquired a lot of negative meanings because of Sayyid Qutb and the implications that came thereafter politically, with movements that were looking for political liberation. But I think that when we start talking about I had a teacher who said that he was misunderstood on that point. But I think that sufficient is to look at the character of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was said that he was talking about the moral breakdown in his society, right? That there was a moral breakdown that had become dominant. It took the sulta, it took the governance of the people. And so when we look at the prophetic example, but the reality of it is that in Jahiliyyah, that is the case. Like, there was a rule of oppressing the weak. There was a rule of dehumanizing women. There was a rule of you get yours, you and your team, so to speak, you know, you get yours by whatever means. But I personally think that, you know, I think that what we have accepted as a collective, like everything that you were describing of the orientation sometimes that we can have, we have accepted that as a collective. And so does that mean like we tear each other apart? You know what I'm saying? We undermine each other. Does that mean then that we have bought into a collective culture of iniquity?
I think it's the thing about cultures of iniquity. People And it's funny that you asked this question, man, because I was thinking about this today. That when you submit to the fact that it is a dog eat dog world, right? It's when you submit to the fact that you're living in a world in which either you're going to be exploiting other people or being exploited.
Right.
Either you're going to be the predator or the prey. Somebody that identifies themselves as strong usually opts to be the predator, right? And this is the kind of culture that we have now. And I think, I mean, mashallah, man, whenever you're present, we know that the level of discourse is going to be very high. We talk about, traditional Islamic study, some people, in the Western canon, philosophy, literature. But I think this is, to my mind, one of the byproducts of a capitalist culture, right? When you get the sense that, okay, this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I work here. I don't even have a living wage.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all being done in the name of what? Capital.
Right.
Right. They had the money to start this. I can't even demand a living wage. So a regular feature of your life is being exploited. That begins to shape what power looks like for you. They say that, I think Fanon said this, one of the dangers of being a vanquished people is that your conqueror is the representation of what power looks like. So when you live in a society in which power is marauding, power is domineering, power is conquering, power is self-serving, other obliterating, I think the goal of most people is just to become one of the powerful, right? And what we need to counteract that is you need benevolence, magnanimity, charity, right? This idea that, a healthy human culture
right.
is one, and it's not that we, and this is why I think Islam is distinct from Christianity. It's not that we esteem weakness. No, al-mu'min al-qawiyyu khayrun min al-mu'min al-dha'ifi wa fihima khayr. The strong believer is better than the weak believer, but in both of them there is good. So yes, to be a person, I was translating the tafsir of Shaykh al-Sha'rawi when I was in Egypt, when I was a student. That's, one of the jobs I had, but it was, mashallah, rewarding, man, on many levels. Shaykh al-Sha'rawi, he said, a man of great charity never works enough just to take care of his family. He works enough to take care of his family and other families, right? Because you have people that will always, right? تُنْصَرُونَ وَتُرْزَقُونَ بِدُعَفَائِكُمْ. You are given victory and you are given provision in accordance with what? How you treat the most vulnerable people in your society. So a healthy society is one in which people that are lower on the totem pole in terms of demonstrable power are treated not simply with respect, but deference, right? Esteem, elevation. And that is how we will know what we're all about as a Muslim community, right? But when you don't have that, it's like, no. The oppressed get stepped on. And I don't want to get stepped on. So I guess I got to get to the other side. So when the strong get hungry, the weak don't eat.
So Sheikh Ubayd, so let me ask you a question, because I think you said a lot of things. In many ways, it characterizes where we're at right now in the world, globally. And I think a lot of us, we may, like, we're in Chicago, Chicago is gentrifying, so it's cool to hang out in Chicago, you know what I'm saying? And so some people, they don't necessarily identify with the suffering of the people that are in the city, or the people that are maybe in the rural areas, or the people that may be in the suburbs and they lost everything. But I think that when you look at the whole system globally, when you look at how, you look at what's going on in some places in Africa, how our cell phones are being powered by slave labor. You know, when you look at maybe what may be going on in some places in India, where youth are the ones that are putting together our rugs, and you go to other places, it's our textiles. You go to other places, refugees are losing their organs and all kind of stuff. There's all kind of stuff taking place. So we're talking really about a spiritual transformation, right? So as an individual, that's a lot for me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's a lot for me to just hang with my own problems and my own struggles. So where's the role for a space? You understand what I'm saying? A space where there was that daughter of Arkham. There was that, you know, first masjid that came up, that prototype masjid, that Kuba, that there was that masjid in Medina. There was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam created spaces, right?
We have to build institutions,
right? And so how? But you know, building institutions now has become an economic challenge. Like if you talk about doing that in Brooklyn, New York, you can't. You know, our people can't. You know, they can do it, but when we talk about doing it, we have to get extremely creative, and we just depend on the resources of the immediate Muslim community. Those resources are not there. I'm talking about the indigenous Muslim community. To get up 3-4 million to just have a basic space in a New York City, right? We're meeting those challenges. And then we have another part of the community that they get up to 5 million or whatever. They may even take out the loan for it, but it has nothing to do with these values. So where do you think we begin? Well, because we need some way so we don't burn out. We need some way so we don't collapse.
What you're saying is
confidence.
What you're saying is very important, Shaykh Yusuf, and I think it's very relevant to the theme of iniquity. How do we create institutions that are representative of the real way power should be deployed? The real way, because people will never be all at the same level.
Right.
That doesn't happen. Some people will be physically stronger. Some people will know more than.
Right.
Some people will know more. Some people will be. That's always going to be there. How do we create spaces, institutions in which those differences serve as opportunities to serve one another instead of opportunities to exploit?
Right.
One another. And I think, like, if you look at Dar al-Alam, it was a house.
Yeah.
I think, one of the mistakes I think we make when we think about institution building. Now, mashallah, we're at Tadleef, which is a grand space, alhamdulillah, under very concerned and conscientious leadership. Is not without its challenges. It's any space that hosts human beings is going to have challenges, right? But the key thing is the mission. We're all dedicated to the same thing. We want the same thing. When one of us sees another out of line or out of step, we gently call the one out of line or out of step back into step, right? But I think we have to start from wherever we can start from. Might be somebody's basement. I think that we forget that the Prophet ﷺ, like his masjid, it was not architecturally a very impressive place. It's maybe 200 yards long, maybe 75 yards wide. No textiles for the floor of the masjid. The masjid was made of pebbles. The roof of the masjid was the stalks and trunks of date palm trees. Because the Prophet ﷺ was not worried about tapestries.
They could have brought stuff in. I think that in this materialist race to build mega masjids, we need to get this straight, that they could have gone to Persia.
Yeah, of course.
They could have gone to Byzantine. They could have gone to Syria.
And made the masjid a monument.
Yeah, and brought all of that.
To say, look at us, we've arrived. Islam is here to stay. Can't you see this chandelier? You know that we're about business. Right. But the construction that the Prophet ﷺ was engaged in was human beings.
Right. It was what?
Human beings, building men, building women that would be representative of what this message is all about. So I think sometimes, we do need adequate space. But sometimes I think we get too fixated on the 3 million, the 4 million, you know, the space in Brooklyn, the space in Chicago. Mashallah, Ted Leaf is a wonderful space. And sometimes it's just start where we can. If you get 10 brothers in one locality to get together, and it can rotate, just to pray Salat al-Subh, to pray the dawn prayer in someone's home, and they can do that together, all 10, for 40 days straight, the blessing that will come out of that collective worship. And you can get 10 sisters that agree to get together in each other's homes every Friday evening, and they can do it 10 consecutive weeks, maybe just for a small dars. One of them, they read from the Quran collectively, or one of them gives a khatira or something like this. The blessing that God will put in that space will amaze you. I've seen efforts that begin in, begin in a humble fashion, like the one I was just describing. Just 10 brothers say, look, we don't have a space. We don't have a masjid. We don't have a community center, but we do recognize the imperative of being together. We do feel that our worship is enhanced when we do it together. Sisters that don't have a community center, don't have a masjid, don't have a community room at the masjid, but we do recognize that our sorority is strengthened when we are in each other's presence and they get together in each other's homes. Tremendous blessing comes out of those spaces, man. And it really is in the spirit of Dar al-Arqam. It was a house, right? It was the Dar, the home of Arqam, right? It wasn't like, a purpose-built special Islamic center, built with the foundations built facing the Qibla. It was someone's home, man. It's never about the structure. It's always about the people within the structure. So even though, I love spaces like this. I love when, we have adequate space and it's comfortable, it's centrally located. That's cool. But even if we don't have something like that, we still have to get together so that this reprogramming, this recoding that we're doing in a book like this can take place. Because if iniquity, like that, hey, yo, look, I was, funny story, man. I was talking with Dr. Jackson once, and we were talking about this, but it was related to this. We weren't talking about this book, but we were talking about kind of the authoritarian cultures that Muslims have produced. And he related to me a quote from a Syrian scholar, Shaykh Kawakibi, 18th century scholar, who said that our problem is that we have a culture of istibdad.
Yeah, he wrote a whole book on it.
Yeah, he wrote a whole book on it. We have a culture of istibdad, which is despotism.
Yes.
Right? We have a culture of istibdad. And he said that anybody who is the subordinate of anybody else will be made to feel the brunt of that subordination. And this is the deep thing about Kawakibi's critique, is he sees it as like a pathology running through the entire society. So that, yes, some of the Muslim feminists would say misogyny, but Sheikh Kawakibi would probably identify that as just one strain of this disease. When men do it to women, you call it misogyny. But then maybe those same women do it to their children, right? And the governors do it to the governed. And the employers do it to their employees. And the rich do it to the poor. And the strong do it to the weak. And the people of knowledge do it to the awam, right? The lay people. And like, this is a sick pathology of domination and iniquity. And I was given a khutbah once, and I mentioned this, that, man, we've produced cultures of istibdad, of iniquity and despotism, and we have to rewrite these cultures. And an Egyptian brother stood up in the middle of a khutbah and said, that's not true. That's not true. I'm Egyptian, that's not true. And I was thinking, have you ever lived in Egypt? Because I have. It's certainly true. But he interrupted, he was so offended, right? Now, you know what they say, you know, a hit dog gonna holler. But something about that statement struck a chord with him that he felt deeply offended by. And, you know, we spoke after, and I apologize. You know, I certainly don't want to offend my brothers. But, hey, man, Sheikh Kawakibi's critique about the kind of culture Muslims have produced, spot on. And it still exists up until now.
So what would be your advice for the new Muslim or the convert, you know, coming into that? Because that's basically what we're struggling with. We are struggling with that as a reality right now.
It's if somebody demonstrates that tendency, get away from them, man. You know, subhanallah, man. The Prophet alayhi wasalam, he said, Sayyidul qawmi khadimuhum. Right? And it's another, khadimul qawmi sayyiduhum. You know, the leader of a people is their servant. The servant of a people is their leader. Kilahuma sahihan. Both of them are authentic. Both of them are sound. Anyone, going back to, there's a quote that's attributed to Elijah Muhammad. He said, people that don't treat you right can't teach you right. Right? If you don't treat me right, you can't teach me right. So I don't care how much knowledge you have. If you appear disrespectful, or even in the way you carry your knowledge, you think that it somehow confers haiba upon you, to look down upon. What can you learn from somebody like that? What can you learn from someone like that? So I don't care what their credentials are. That attitude invalidates the transmission of knowledge, man. It precludes the transmission of knowledge. So I would say to the new Muslim, if somebody displays that attitude, flee from them. Now, I'm not saying, for a person to speak with authority, alhamdulillah, but even in that, their focus is always service. It's always service, always service. We used to study, we used to review this statement that's attributed to Ghazali in the latter part of his life. يعني أهل العلم تهمهم الرعاية. The people of knowledge are concerned with رعاية. ولكن السفهاء تهمهم الرواية. Right? Foolish people, imbecilic people, all they're concerned with is قال وقيل, قال وقيل, قال وقيل. But the real ulama are always concerned with service. Right? That hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, I think speaks volumes, that. And any time a young student is considering studying iftah, giving fatwas, I always tell him to review this hadith. I always tell her to review this hadith. When the man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Inni halaktu, I'm destroyed, right? Because him and his wife were together during the day in the month of Ramadan. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him, you have to fast 2 consecutive, you have to free a slave. You have to find somebody in a state of bondage and pay for their, emancipation. Yeah. Man said, I don't have money for that. Well, in that case, you have to fast shahrayni mutatabi'in, 2 consecutive months. Ya Rasulullah, if I couldn't make it through 1 day, what would give you the impression I can make it through 60 days? Well, in that case, you have to feed 60 poor people. Do you expect me to find anyone more impoverished than me? The Prophet ﷺ smiled, called for a sa'ah, a canister of dates, gave the man the dates, said, take this to your family, feed your people, and Allah has expiated your sin. What was it in the Prophet ﷺ that he was willing to work with that man until he found something that suited him?
I think that you need to emphasize that point a little more, because that's what is what was being alluded to before. That do we know the Prophet? Because this is not the Prophet, you know, that we present in the community. See what I'm saying? This is a person, you know, imagine if that would happen in our community, how that person would be dealt.
Oh man, he would be, I mean, lambasted, man. I mean, he would, you know, which I think, and this is one of the mistakes, you know, the Prophet ﷺ is the messenger of Allah, alayhi salatu wasalam. May God bless him and grant him peace. I think some people who love kalam like to make him like the theologian in chief. People who love law, they like to make him like the faqih al-fuqaha.
Right.
You know, in actuality, the Prophet ﷺ wasn't a faqih. Right? I mean, all knowledge, he's the yanba. He's the wellspring of fiqh, but he wasn't a faqih. To say he was a faqih would limit his role. Right? And he wasn't a mutakallim. Right? He's the yanba of ilm al-kalam, but he wasn't a theologian. He was a messenger of God. And his concern at all times is to connect people with Allah. He's not interested in preserving a tradition of fiqh. We're interested in that, alhamdulillah, because it's through that tradition that we're staying aligned with his practice, alayhi salatu. But when he's engaging that man, he's not concerned with preserving a tradition of fiqh, nor is he concerned with preserving a tradition of theology. He's concerned with his iman. My job is to teach you about God. And we have to remember that, you know, fiqh has its place and theology has its place, but that minhaj nabawi, that prophetic way, is how we make sense of theology and fiqh. You know, subhanallah. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. Wa iyyakum jami'an. So should we open up for Q&A?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section of the Zoom, inshallah. And if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, put it in our comment section, inshallah. If you have any questions, I repeat, if you have any questions, please put it in our Q&A section of the Zoom. And if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, inshallah, please post it in the comment section.
MashaAllah, we have, you know, very erudite, very learned, very special guest in the building tonight. It would be a great disservice to yourselves to not ask Shaykh Yusuf Rios a few questions. So anyone who is tuning in, and it doesn't have to be about iniquity. That was the chapter that we covered today. But you have the attention of the Shaykh if you want to ask anything. The floor is yours, inshallah.
Bismillah. So one of the questions is, Saddam, is there many indigenous people coming into the fold of Islam currently?
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, the rate of conversion seems to have slowed down a little bit. And I'm judging more anecdotally. I haven't looked at the numbers. But you know, I remember when I first embraced Islam, true story, man. It was so normal for people to take Shahada after Jummah. Like every week, there would be people taking Shahada after Jummah. That 4 or 5 months into embracing Islam, I didn't even get excited about it. I just thought that was a regular, you know, I mean, and I only later did I realize that for like people from immigrant Muslim backgrounds that maybe had never seen somebody embrace Islam in person, they would be like waiting with bated breath, like, oh my God, man, this person's, he's becoming Muslim, you know. But like for, you know, people around the masjid, you know, back then I used to go to the Chicago Islamic Center, which was on 53rd and Justine in the town. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? In the town, in Motown, in the town, you know what I'm saying? But it was and I ain't talking about Detroit, but it was so regular for people to embrace Islam that it was like, yeah. Now at our masajid, it's like somebody's embracing Islam. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. And I realized it's become more rare than it used to be. You still do have a lot of conversions to Islam in prison. You know, a lot of people embracing Islam in prison. And this should be something we pay attention to and something we take great pride in, man. That people
from my they're coming in. Look, I recently I was reflecting on a lot of the way that we do demographics for the Muslim community.
Mhm.
We don't do data collection in any way that's really reliable in some cases.
Mhm.
In my estimation, like
Mhm.
I was thinking to myself, there's some injustices in how we're doing demographics because we're saying even there's this concept that has come in the mainstream Muslims, and then the mainstream Muslims are being identified now as the immigrant community and the first generation Muslim,
Mhm.
and the African American Muslims are being characterized as lower in number. The problem with that is this: that we're taking the immigrant community and the same way that we're saying white,
Mhm.
where you have a bunch of different ethnic groups,
You're just lumping them all.
you're lumping them all together. The question is, if you talk about the immigrant community and you're comparing to the African American community, who's in reality, what are the numbers? Because if you take each tribe on its own,
Mhm.
right? The Palestinians, don't say Arabs, say Palestinians,
Palestinians, the
Syrians, Egyptians,
Mhm.
Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, like that.
Sri Lankans.
Yeah, then that whole concept of the black community being small is not going to be the same anymore.
No. In fact, it becomes one of the largest.
Yes, and this is the disservice that we're doing with the way that we do demographics. The other thing is that you have a large number of Latinos coming in,
Allahu Akbar.
and you have a continuous flow of European American Muslims coming,
Yes,
and others as well, right?
Mhm.
But again, if we're gonna do that this group is representative of Islam and this group is not,
Mhm.
with demographics, we're going to do an injustice because there's also still African Americans, like you said, coming into the deep.
Yeah, no, alhamdulillah. I mean, Islam is naturally persuasive, man. If a person can learn about Islam clearly and further see Islam practiced beautifully, Islam is very persuasive. It's very persuasive. And people still are embracing Islam. Alhamdulillah. I think that when I came into Islam over 20 years ago, I think, conversion was, I'm not going to say was at an all-time high, but, people, it just seemed, this just, I haven't done any like demographic research, but anecdotally, it seemed like people were embracing Islam all the time. I mean, I embrace Islam. My younger sister embraced Islam. My best friend embraced Islam. My other best friend embraced Islam. My other best friend embraced Islam. Then his younger brother embraced Islam, married my sister, but it didn't work out. But
Yeah, no,
I mean, it was like we'd embrace Islam. Then my grandfather embraced Islam. Then my grandmother took Shahada before she passed away. Allah yarhamuhuma. So my thing is like it was just a different
even before that was different. Like the grandfather of my children, he African American Tabligh Jamaat in Detroit. They had lines.
Malana Zubair.
Yeah, in that community, they had lines of people. Like I heard stories that they had lines of people for Shahada. It wasn't what Brother Michael,
it was like
Brother
people
John
standing in line.
They were actually saying that they had lines of people, and it was like there were so many people, coming in. Yeah, I don't think that we're seeing that in the same way.
No, it doesn't. It's not like that anymore, man. Yeah, that, and I feel like the other thing too is we've abandoned the streets. We've abandoned, one of the things that existed when I embraced Islam is that Muslims had presence.
Mm-hmm. Muslims had presence. Yeah.
Muslims had presence, and these are people who never get acknowledged. In fact, now they get ridiculed and made fun of. And I was one such person that did this. But street vendors, man, street vending street vending over the past few years, it's got a bad rap.
Yes.
Where, I don't want a brother, sisters talk, I don't want a brother sell incense and alls. But in terms of the religious ecosystem in urban neighborhoods, man, those brothers were very important, man. Very important. That you could pull up to the currency exchange and you would see a group of Muslims, hawking their merchandise, getting out there. It was like a magnet for da'wah in those communities. That's not nearly as popular as it used to be. Nobody does that anymore.
I'm gonna say something that some people may not like, but I personally feel that when you marginalize the Black community, you create a culture in which there's no connection. Because what happened in that time, we came up in Black culture. When you look at hip hop, when you look at,
for sure,
even though the Latinos, the Puerto Ricans were part of it, it's pretty much Black culture. When people don't like to acknowledge that the nation, the 5%ers, a lot of these movements that were in the Black community created a milieu that was ripe for Islam. The symbols were there.
It was all what I'm saying?
And,
yeah, it was all there.
And some of our Maulanas, I've heard some young brothers talking about this. They say there's an urban myth. It was related to me that this was being said to some of our youth. There's an urban myth that people came into Islam to hip hop, and that's invalidating our experience.
Nah, it's not no urban myth.
But the reality of it is that Black culture created that space of rebellion that allowed people to break from Christianity and everything else. Because this was a very strict Christian society.
Absolutely.
It was a very strict white Christian society. Absolutely. Even Judaism came under that.
Absolutely.
But Blacks, in terms of Islam, that's why people like Muhammad Ali is very important, because it's not just that he was a boxer that built masajid throughout the whole world. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's also that he rocked the cultural, restraints, and it allowed a Muhammad to not Cassius, a Latin name, but Muhammad now becomes something that, like now Mr. John Smith, who's the TV host, now he has to pronounce Muhammad.
And one of the things that's beautiful about that, and perhaps this is a good place to end, I know we passed 9 o'clock, but isn't it amazing how those two names, every American can say them like a household name, Muhammad Ali. Nobody's, when Americans say Muhammad Ali, it doesn't sound foreign. It's not foreign at all to them. No, Muhammad Ali. It's just like that. And it's amazing that when they read those names in other places, they do say them with the foreignness. Muhammad Ali, but his becoming Muslim was definitive proof that Islam is a part, a natural and organic part of Black cultures, and by extension, American cultures. But maybe that's a good place to end. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واخر دعوانا ان الحمد لله رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر ان الانسان لفي خسر الا الذين امنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. امين يا رب العالمين. ما شاء الله. Man, let me make sure I got your